Hey gang, welcome back for another episode of Ranching Reboot, the podcast that reboots your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. I'm your host, Red Hills Rancher. This episode made possible from support by my amazing patrons on patreon.com/redhillsrancher and my awesome subscribers on Spotify. If you'd like to know more, click the link in the description or all the way at the bottom of the show notes to subscribe on Spotify. It's fall in the Great Plains in the Midwest, and that only means one thing: deer season. If it didn't start for you, it's going to be right around the corner. If you're having trouble finding hunters to come out and help you manage your deer population, go sign up your land on landtrust.com. Click the link in the show notes. There's also plenty of quail on the ranch this year. As a matter of fact, I just booked my second quail hunting party through Land Trust. Speaking of birds, let me remind you about Bobolinks, the delicious, tangy, smoky, awesome on-the-go meat snack. It's great for snacking. I always have one handy when I need a midday boost. Bobolinks are just one of many great products from Blue Nest Beef. Check out Blue Nest Beef's website for delicious, shipped right to your door, grass-fed and finished beef from Audubon Conservation Ranching certified bird-friendly ranches, just like mine. Click on the link in the description or go to bluenestbeef.com and enter the code BOBOREBOOT for a discount on your first pack of Bobolinks. Next up is the Essentials of Regenerative Ranching course scholarship, and the winner is Isaac Bren. You're going to Ardmore October 31st and November 1st, so check your email for more information on that. Huge thanks to all of y'all that entered. I'm going to try to do something for you guys in the future. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. My guest is Walker Milhoan, who joined me on Zoom from the Bridger Bowl just outside of Bozeman, Montana. We talk about a little bit of everything from ranching in Montana, heli-skiing in Alaska, to living in a tent alongside the White Nile in Africa so he could kayak for a year before they dammed up the river. We'll get to that right after this. Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Hi, Walker. How are you today?
I'm doing well, doing really well. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for coming today. So let's start us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about where you're at.
Okay. I am located in Bozeman, Montana, which I'm sure everybody knows about these days. It seems like everybody's moving here. Half in part thanks to the show Yellowstone. I blame Kevin for that. Um, well,
Kevin
and it's a
Costner?
nice, yeah.
Okay.
There's a bumper sticker that goes around here that has a picture of his face that says I blame Kevin. Um, but no, it's a great place to live, and we actually live 16 miles outside of town, up at Bridger Bowl, which is a local ski hill here, and then I work for a ranch that's in the canyon, kind of just below my house, a few miles. So I do that in the mornings, and right now there's a roughly 450 first calf heifers that are up there, and then work there till about noon. And then when I'm done doing that, I come in here and mainly build websites and kind of web applications and stuff. And I've had clients like Yeti, Sitka, and now it's kind of trending to more ag-based applications or businesses, stuff like that.
Okay. Very cool. Are you from Montana?
No, I was actually born and raised in Vail, Colorado, of all places, and my family moved there before it was Vail. And so then it kind of, the town grew up, and my grandfather had a ranch in Rifle, Colorado, which was it's about 60 miles west of there.
Okay.
And so I'd go there in the summers and help out. And my dad is from Nebraska. He moved to Vail in 1962, the year that it was, well, I think 64. So it was officially incorporated as a town in 1962. So the town was only 18 years old when I was born, and still pretty small, very community oriented. Then a lot different than what it is now. I'm sure you probably heard of it. It's a big ski resort.
I've been there a couple times. I used to ski a
Yeah.
little bit. Vail's
Oh, you did?
it's one of my favorite places to go.
Okay.
I,
Cool.
let's get into it. So I saw on your Instagram that you're a heli-skiing guide.
Oh, yeah, I was for 5 years for a company called Points North Heli Adventures, which is out of Cordova, Alaska.
Okay. So you would go to Alaska and like take people way up in the mountains on a helicopter and jump out?
Yeah, it's it's not as dramatic, I guess, as people, you don't just like jump out of the helicopter, but um, so the season starts late February because it's too dark prior to that, right? And then up there you gain about 6.5 minutes of daylight a day, and then so throughout the course of the season, by the end of the season, which is late March or early April, like I think it's late March. Um, so you're not there very long, but the days are real long and you can ski forever. And then yeah, it's cool. The base is located in an old salmon cannery in Cordova, and Cordova is a old just fishing village, and there's no roads or anything in and out of it. So you're kind of on an island. There was a railroad track that was built um, that was going to connect it to, I can't remember the name of the town, but it was called the $1 Million Bridge, and the bridge fell down. So that was kind of the only way out of it besides flying or the ferry. Um, but yeah, clients show up and you fly in A-Star helicopters. I'm sure you're familiar with those.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a pilot, and then the guide usually sits in the front, and then there's four clients in the back, and um, go up to a peak, uh, get out, helicopter takes off, and then generally you send the clients first so that you can kind of clean up the mess if something happens.
That happened pretty often.
uh, it had not as much as you think, because most of the people that show up there are pretty advanced skiers, because it's like advanced terrain. It's kind of like the North Shore of surfing for, it's like the upper echelon. But there's definitely beginner stuff like that's real long and mellow and nice. So, but typically the majority of the clientele is pretty advanced.
Yeah. Now, full disclosure, I say that I've skied and I have skied before. I think my best year, I think I did 14 days in the mountains. And I know
Okay.
that's nothing, but for a flatlander like me that's got to drive, 8-10 hours to get
Yeah.
to some place to ski, it was a lot. And
Yeah.
I got to where I could go back in the backcountry at Vale and do a lot of the black diamond and double black diamond stuff back there, but not moguls. Definitely not moguls, and do not. I'm not a cross the ropes kind of guy. That sounds really really intense.
Yeah, it can be intense for sure, because especially there's like film crews that come up for ski movies that are like you know professional skiers, and you're with them, so you're in their terrain. And actually you used to ski with them, but it kind of evolved to where the guide would drop you off, or drop the professionals off, and then stay in the helicopter while they were filming, just in case something happened, that you could get to them quicker.
That makes
um
sense.
yeah, but no, nonetheless, you're like, yeah, sometimes, I mean, the last year I was there, and I had kids, or had my first child, and that changed my risk tolerance. So I was on top of a peak and almost passed out just from vertigo. It was weird. And
That
then I kind of
kids have a way of
decided, I was like,
messing with
yeah,
that risk tolerance matrix, don't they?
yeah, yeah. I was like, I don't know if I need to do quite this anymore, but
So how did you get into that? Like that seems like that's a pretty narrow pool of applicants. It seems like a job a lot of people would want, but not very many people would be able to qualify for.
Yeah, it is. So I taught skiing for a year just as an instructor in Vail, and I had a friend named Kevin Hussey who was best friends with the owner, and Kevin. So Kevin Quinn owns Points North Heli Adventures, or I think he just sold it, but at the time he owned it, and he offered Kevin Hussey, my friend, the only chance to come ski for free. And so he asked me to go with him, and he convinced the owner to give me like a really good discount. And I was like, man, I can't pass that up. And so went there. I don't know. I skied with Dean Conway, who's like one of the old kind of crusty guides from the '90s. And then when I was leaving, they offered me a job, and I think at the time I was the youngest heli ski guide ever in Alaska. I was 24 when I got the job.
Okay, that's kind of wild.
Yeah, it was cool. It was an honor to get that offer
So
because yeah, they have a lot of applicants.
very cool. I can remember I've gone up and done snowcat skiing. Gone up to I think it
Yeah,
was Keystone. Went up to a back bowl in Keystone on a snowcat. That was pretty
yeah,
fun. That was
that
also one
sounds
of those
about right.
days. I think it was also like a mid-December day when it was a nice balmy 12 below zero and about 9,000 miles an hour wind. It was just a great
Yep,
day to be out on the mountains.
yeah, that's generally how the weather is in Keystone.
Yep. And it's windy in Breckenridge.
Yep,
Yep. And it's usually nice at Vale.
Breckenridge.
I heard it Brecken wind.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
had
and Vail is usually really nice.
so I had they had used to have this thing called an Epic Pass. You familiar with that?
Yeah, they still do have it.
This was I think they'd only had it for a couple of years, and it was a really good deal, and I thought it was awesome because it'd track your vertical footage for the day. There was a day I went out with a friend, and it wasn't too long after opening. I think it was early December, maybe, and we ended up at Breckenridge, and they got 6 inches of powder overnight, and we stayed over on 7 all day. And my pass told me that I rode over 36,000 vertical feet that day.
That's cool. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it because it's a lot of vert, and those chairs are fast, and
And it
yeah,
wasn't
that's cool.
crowded. So we were just run, run, ski right down, ski right on, get on the chair, go right back up again.
Very cool. So yeah, you just get on 70 and head straight west, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's 2 hours north of I-70, and
Yeah.
then you just set the cruise and book it until things get vertical.
Okay. Yeah, and not to change subjects, but my dad's from Lexington, Nebraska, so he spent like a lot of time out in the plains, and he would always take like some roundabout way to get there. So
I
um,
I started taking more and more back roads. There's a time and place when you want to get somewhere and you want to be there
yeah,
and get on the interstate, but lately I've been trying to leave a little bit earlier and take a little more time and cruise the back roads. Now, I will
yeah,
say this, we've all been spoiled by traveling on the interstates, and there's, gas and McDonald's everywhere. When you get off the main highways and you get on 2-lane roads, you better plan your stops out because I went to Torrington, Wyoming a couple weeks ago. It was a 9-hour drive. Like I saw probably about $53 generals, but like
yeah,
I don't think I went past more than a half a dozen gas stations on the way up there.
yeah,
It's kind of wild.
yeah.
So
I was just gonna say, like, we would drive from Vail to Lexington, which is about a 5 hour drive, but it for some reason it would always take us like 12 or 13 hours with my dad when we were young. And then my grandma got sick one time, and she was in Lincoln, and my brother and I drove out there, and we got to Lexington within like, you know 4 hours and 45 minutes or something. And I was like, why did it only take that amount of time? And my brother was like, dude, it's because we'd stop at every historical marker and take every small highway.
there were some of the highways that I took back and forth to Wyoming. Like there was in Nebraska, they're really good about having historical markers everywhere. And I haven't really traveled a whole lot through Nebraska. I'm Southern Kansas guy, whatever. But all the historical markers up and down the highways, kind of along the Platte River. Like, yeah, if I wasn't trying to get home before 2 o'clock in the morning, I might stop and read a couple of these and get out, stretch
Yeah.
my legs. But I wanted to be home before 2 o'clock. We
Yeah.
made it, but not much. So heli-skiing in Alaska. What'd you do after that?
Um, well, that was so right before that. Uh, I grew up like when I was growing up, I got in just because my dad's side of the family was all into rodeo from Nebraska.
Okay.
So we would go out there and start rodeoing and like go to the little like Sumner and Oconto and all these little places and rodeo. And then I started doing Little Britches rodeo, and this is leading into that. But right after, and I high school rodeoed and um, Colorado Junior Rodeo Association, all that kind of stuff. Uh, Went to Tarleton State University down in Stephenville, Texas, my freshman year to try to rodeo, but I got a 0.75 GPA because there was too much else, too many extracurricular activities going on down there between the dance halls and jackpots and stuff. So that was
Okay.
short lived. Um, Moved back to Colorado, and that's when I just was living in Vail and skiing, and then got into the heli skiing for a while. So I do that in the winter times for five winters, and then in the summer times I'd either work as a land surveyor or help this old guy Maynard Smith run his cows way up to this cow camp in the high country, which is really cool.
Like they're around Vale.
Yeah, so 30 miles west of Vail, you go to Eagle, and
Okay.
then from Eagle, you go south towards Sylvan Lake, and up there's an area called Lime Park, and it's actually right in between Basalt and Eagle. So you just kind of drop over the backside into Aspen, really. And up there is about 12,000 feet, and he ran his whole just kind of commercial herd of cow calf up there during the summer, and he lived in a little cow camp up there.
Was that your
And
first exposure to ranching?
no, just because my grandfather had the ranch and rifle, so we go down there
Oh, right.
um, and help him out, or I mean, help the manager out there, and and then just working around just some of the small various family ranches that were in Gypsum and Eagle growing up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those were your summers. I was going to ask when you said those were your summers when you were up in Alaska doing heli skiing. So what came after that?
Let's see. After the heli skiing, well, then I came kind of in between there. I came to Montana State, so I moved up here in 2002 to go to college, and I have like I've done a lot of random things. So came up here to go to school, started the snow science program. Um,
It's no science. I
yeah, it's like
like to
a
know more.
yeah, it's an engineering program, and there's a university in Switzerland, and then Montana State has it. And so you basically study the science of snow, like what avalanches and snowpacks and the grains within the snow and the moisture content and why avalanches happen. And the further I got into it, the more I realized it was basically an engineering degree, and that once you get out of the program, there's like six jobs. So it's like you can basically become an avalanche forecaster. And
That there's pretty
those,
limited demand for those, I imagine.
yeah, so those guys, and they don't let go of their jobs because it's a good job. Like you get to be outside all winter, skiing around, you get great benefits, whatever. So I ended up actually dropping out and starting the CrossFit gym, which was the second one in Montana and first one in Bozeman, because it was like more of a means to an end, just to be a better athlete for skiing, and that was like the best way to do it,
Okay.
or that was the best way that I had found. up to that point as far as exercise programs that, would get you in the best shape for skiing. So opened that, and I only ran that for 2 years and then ended up selling it because I had met my wife, who was living in Vail at the time, and moved back there for a little bit. But she was moving back to Montana because she's from Montana, and she had started a title company in Western Montana and was moving back to her house that she built. So
Okay.
I told her I was going to tag along, and it's kind of unexpected for her, but here we are 15 years later, 3 kids.
Okay. I guess that works.
Yeah.
So that's how you ended up in Montana.
Yeah, originally for school. Yep. And then back in Montana because of my wife. And so then from there, we were living in St. Regis, Montana, which is a very, very small, kind of an old, it's a combination of mining and timber in that town. And it was great to live there. It was an interesting place. Like a lot of people move there, kind of get off the grid. So not a lot of people like, nobody messed with you. It was like, you just kind of did what you did. You'd go fishing, really small, but the schools weren't very good. And, we were like, we can't let our kids go to school here just because it was just like not a good place to send your kid to school. But I started taking some, I went to the horseshoeing school at Montana State again, because I was like, it seems like a kind of a good way to segue myself back into the industry. And then after working underneath a few horses for, a few months, I was like, I don't know if this is the greatest idea.
Farriering horses is a young man's game.
Yeah. And I don't even know how the young guys do it. My back would just be seized every time after like 2 horses.
Okay.
So I have a very, if you look at my career path, it's like a kid just took a scribble to a piece of paper. So then,
It's late bloomer. Just took a while to find what you really wanted to do.
yeah, yeah. And then we had our first son in 2009, and that's when I realized I wanted to get like more serious about, kind of ranching and ranch management. So I ended up going to TCU ranch management program.
Okay.
And that was really cool. I don't know if you know much about that program, but it's
I, I
fairly,
I don't have any firsthand touch points with TCU
yeah,
ranch management. I know quite a few people that have been through the course, and I see what they do with their properties. And I've heard, we'll just leave it at that.
yeah. Yeah. So, I just, I guess for the listeners too, like if they have never heard of it, like it's a lot of number crunching, and you're in the classroom from 9 to basically 4 every day. I think it's a total of like 56 credit hours in 1 year if you kind of work it out that way. Um, but really, the most valuable part of it is going to different operations. And I know just from listening to your podcast, and I think it was the one with, oh, but anyway, just like getting another viewpoint from another operation. And you take 5 week-long field trips, North Texas, West Texas, East Texas, South Texas, and then one to like the Flint Hills kind of Osage area. And the producers there will tell you everything that they tell their banker, attorneys, so you get to ask them pretty much any question. There's not a whole lot that's off limits. And so that's kind of a real valuable experience, just seeing how they do things, how they operate, listening to mistakes, whatever. But I think really what I got most out of it was just like learning how to like apply myself and think more critically. And that's where I actually ultimately started learning how to use technology. So,
Okay. So After TCU, you spent some time in Africa.
Yeah.
I
Well,
I,
I guess
I want to hear about that. Like how did that come about? Why did you decide to go to Africa?
so. Actually, I went twice, um, and when I was still living here, when I was here in Bozeman, prior to meeting my wife, my buddy and I. So when I lived in Vale, um, prior to moving up to Bozeman, I had lived with five professional kayakers,
Okay.
whitewater kayakers, and they.
Okay, you're going this direction. I like it. I'm just going to let you run.
Okay, so I moved in with them, and got into the sport of whitewater kayaking just because they just threw me into it. They're like, "Come on, let's go," and almost drowned a few times, and then picked it up. But they had been to Uganda, Africa, which is Eastern Africa, um, and like it right where Lake Victoria is. That's the start of the White or the Victoria Nile,
Right.
and it's a town called Jinja. And so they had told us stories about just this water that's massive. It's bigger than the Grand Canyon. It's warm, pretty friendly. And what I mean by that is like the rapids are huge, but at the end of them is like a big swimming pool. So you can kind of gather your stuff, get put back together before the next one.
Okay.
And so my buddy Tyler, who actually shares the office next to me here, he and I were just sitting around one day, and we heard that they were going to build the Simba power plant, and we were like, the Nile is going to be dammed forever. We should go check it out. And at the time, I had a sweet truck, is like a 24 valve Cummins high output, thing would pass everything but the gas station.
I
Um,
own several. I'm aware.
and so I sold it and just used the proceeds from that to get our plane ticket and live over there. And you could live. I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention because I was 25 years old, and uh, but it was, I mean, less than $20 a day, and to live pretty well. I
This
mean,
was
I
also
lived,
20 years ago, right?
yeah, 20 years ago,
Okay.
and so I lived in like a one man tent at the Nile River Explorers Camp, and ended up staying, I think, almost a year, just whitewater kayaking, and we did some volunteer work for this group called Soft Power, which kind of builds schools and does malaria education. Does
You spent a year living in a one-man tent in the wilds of in the bush in Africa just so you could kayak up and down a river.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I wouldn't say it was the bush, like it was kind of a terraced area, and there's other campers, and these big overland buses would come through with all these like crazy Europeans on them. They were actually traveling almost the whole continent of Africa, but then they would stop in, and I think they'd been on the road for quite a while, so they were ready to party. And pretty, I mean, we just met so many different people, like Germans and Austrians and Kiwis, and you know fellow Africans and Canadians.
So
South.
if your tent was in one place and you were kayaking down the river, like I'm having trouble imagining a well-developed network of roads through the African bush. So there was multiple pickup locations up and down the river, that, and I'm sure that there was, a river Uber you could call to come pick you up in your kayak and take you back to your tent, right?
Yeah, it's I mean, I wouldn't say, I was going to say established, but I mean, there's a lot of villages along the river, and just like probably one of your better improved roads on the ranch. That's like the quality of the roads there. And then you can either get a matatu, which is a bus, and that you can pack a bunch of people, maybe like 12 people in that, if you're going kind of a long distance, or you can get a boda boda, which is basically a scooter. Um, and then you just crawl on the back, and you hold your kayak kind of behind you like this, and your paddle, and then I mean they go ripping through. I mean, people are kind of dodging out of the way, ripping through brush. Um, you kind of just look straight ahead and not really pay attention to the periphery because there's there
Look
was
straight
cases
ahead,
with
hold on to your shit, and try not to die.
yeah, because there were times when, like right before we got there, uh one of the more prominent people that was living there and kind of the videographer guy, he went into Kampala on a boda and got hit by a bus, and they just threw him in a pickup truck and took him to the hospital. And I mean, there's no real procedure for stabilization, anything like that.
I,
So
I imagine the ambulance service is a couple hours away if they would even answer the phone.
yeah, yeah, they kind of just like throw you on a little flatbed and bounce you back into town.
Hope you survive, I guess.
Yeah, so that's why you either if you had music, you just put your headphones on and kind of just hope for the best. And everything worked out good, except I did end up getting some kind of stomach virus that and all I could eat for like 3 months was pineapple and yogurt.
That doesn't
And
sound like any fun.
no, that part was not fun.
What was the craziest thing about your living on the year on the White Nile?
Um, I don't know. We took a cool tour down to like the Rwanda Congo region, and there's a really cool national park down there called Queen Elizabeth National Park, and the Ruwenzori Mountains are there, and there's like a glacier up there. We never saw the glacier because it was all socked in with clouds, but um, we were on the Ishasha River, and across the river is the Congo, which is a pretty Wild West place, and then
You
Rwanda
take your
was
kayak down
right
that
there.
river?
No, we didn't kayak down that one. That one was really full of crocus and hippos. So, and it didn't have any white water anyway. But that was it was interesting going through some of those real rural towns. Um, but I think probably just the craziest part is oh I don't know, probably the Europeans that would come through because there were some interesting folks.
Okay. What was the food like?
The food in Uganda was not too bad. It's like in the morning you walk out. So the Nile River Explorers is like kind of a camp, and you can just walk out to this other little villages right there. And I can't remember the kid's name, but he made these chapatis, what they're called. So they're like a tortilla, and he makes them in a like a wok almost,
Okay.
gets them real hot, and then cracks like an egg, and then an avocado, throws that in there, and that's breakfast. Or you could do like Nutella and a banana. So those things are pretty good. And then they have like the most delicious pineapple in the world. You can eat literally the entire thing except for like the rind. Um, and then their staple really is called posho, which is corn maze, kind of basically like if you think of grits, but like a cake.
Okay.
And then red beans. And so if you would go eat like a real traditional meal with a family, they just have a bowl with if you just think of throwing beans and then they put posho in it and they just pass it around and you just put your hand in it and take some posho and beans and eat it.
Interesting you say that that would be traditional because
Yeah, I don't know.
corn originated in Mesoamerica, and
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, so did beans, like a lot of edible beans and dry
yeah,
beans. I think they also came from like South America and Mesoamerica. So it's interesting that having a traditional meal in Africa of corn and beans.
yeah. Or maybe I should say staple because that's kind of what they ate every day.
Well, I mean, it, okay, so it's traditional. How long has
Yeah,
it been their tradition? How long do you need to do something before it is a tradition? I
yeah,
don't know,
true.
10 years, 20 years. So if they've got a cultural history of 250 years of corn and beans, and they've got varieties that have been adapted and naturalized to their environment, Yeah, sure. Traditional.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, or other times they'd kill a chicken so you could get some chicken, and then, pasta. It was, if you went and had, if they like really did it up for you at somebody's house, you'd have maybe a chicken, like one chicken between 6 or 7 people. So there wasn't much protein other than the beans, but then they'd have potatoes, and then the
Another South
pocho,
American crop.
yeah, and then pasta. So a lot of carbs,
Okay.
and then pineapple for dessert. So that's a long story into my first experience in Africa, leading into TCU. That's with TCU. I went back to Ghana, which is in Western Africa, to help. Um, at the time, and I don't really know if it's going on anymore, but they formed this thing called the Institute of Ranch Management, which started in Panama, and they went down because there were some producers that went to school at TCU and went back to Panama and kind of started applying some of the principles there, just like building cattle budgets and stuff like that, with their local kind of farmer ranchers there. And so the TCU started the Institute of Ranch Management, and then the Ghanaian government reached out to TCU because at the time, Ghana was really trying to invest in their economy, and they have offshore oil, and so they're a fairly wealthy nation. And then they had tax-free imports on agricultural goods, and then in kind of going back to the 70s, the Italians started a ranch there. They call it just a cattle farm there, but um, as basically a demonstration ranch for the Ghanaian people in the Volta region, which is in eastern Ghana, or kind of along the Volta River, which is a huge river, like
Okay.
250,000 CFS type of. It's a lot of water moving through there. Um, and so the Italians built this. It was a pretty sophisticated operation. It had some like dipping vats, both that you would drive through, and for the cattle. All the modern stuff for the 70s. And then I think when the euro formed, it collapsed the, what is that, the lira, Italian lira.
Yes.
And so Italy withdrew all of their work there, and the Aveme cattle station kind of sat dormant forever until we went there. And they just had like some tenants that were living on it, running some cattle. And so I went there with one of the professors and another guy who ranches down in Victoria, Texas. And we did our initial research, and we were only there for a month that time. And then later on, my brother and I went back for 3 months, and uh, like took a full inventory of the property, and then kind of worked our way basically from the smallest producer, just interviewing them, to like the abattoirs, and then all the way up to like the Move and Pick Hotel, which is like a 5-star hotel right in Accra, in because they sell like burger that they purchase from the region. But they purchase most of their burger from South Africa. So they wanted to try to, raise their own beef, and it seemed like it was going to be a great deal, because the Ghanaian government was basically like, yep, you can do what you need to do to get this built. We'll help you build infrastructure. There's cell coverage everywhere, so communication is easy. We're interested in building like storage for, grain or whatever, if they wanted to do that. There was available water for irrigation. It's kind of, the sky was the limit. Um, and then I think just the bureaucracy between, TCU and the government just never materialized, and we never really heard anything more about it after we came back. I
Well,
mean, we
that's,
delivered our plan, and then that was it.
I was going to ask as a follow up, did they ever develop their industry or ever do anything with it?
They didn't develop that into beef cattle operation, but as far as I know, I've heard it's rice now. And I don't know who developed that. It was pretty big. It was 25,000 hectares. Um, I
What
don't
is
know. I
that
can't.
in acres for everybody else?
Let's see. I'm gonna have to look that up. But I think it's like 14,000 acres or something.
Ought to be pretty ought to be a big enough area to run some cows on, be able to grow some grass. You'd think.
Well, yeah. And so I don't know if you've been to. Oh wow, no, that's 61,000 acres.
I was gonna say I thought every hectare was like three
Yeah,
something.
yeah, 61,000 acres. That's a big place.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if
It's
you've
King Ranch size.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been to South Texas, but if you're in the on the Accra Plains, if there's somebody blindfolded you and put you on the Accra Plains or in South Texas, you would not know where if the difference. They look identical.
Okay.
So kind of tall grass prairies.
And you said you were over by the Volta River. Is that kind of the Accra Plains? It's part of that area.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I get it. I get it. So you did your time in Ghana. Now we're back in Bozeman.
Back in Bozeman.
How did you get hooked up with your employer running cows up in the mountains?
So I got hooked up with this place because um, 3 years ago we had a huge forest fire come through that started out as just it was a lightning strike that was burning inside of a hollow tree for about a week, and then the conditions got real dry and hot, and just one tree went up in flames on this real popular hiking area called the M. And I don't know why they didn't put it out then, because it was literally just one single tree that was on fire, and I guess didn't seem threatening at all. And then that evening it kind of grew a little bit, and then it kind of exploded the next day, and it went over into Bridger Canyon where we live. And then that day it was, I don't know, I think 85 or 90 degrees, and then the winds picked up to like 45 or 50 miles an hour.
You're gonna have a bad day.
Yeah. And so the fire moved, I think 13 miles in less than 40 minutes up the canyon. And I was at home working because I was just at the time I was working from home. And I ran down to the ranch headquarters, and I knew that they had cattle there, so I just pulled in. And manager Mike, I was like, "Hey man, I know how to ride a horse and move cows. If you need help getting them out of here, fire looks like it's coming this way." And he's like, "Well, no, uh, I got some help coming, but then they shut the canyon down, so nobody could get there." So he called me back up, and we ended up getting about, I think, like 65 yearlings out of this Pine Creek area that the fire came blazing right through, and got them put out into a hayfield, and everything survived. Um, but then the next summer, he asked if I just wanted to come help him out, and it's a I love I love being in the industry, right? I only get paid $18 an hour, which
I think if some of us were honest about our books, we are paying $18 an hour to go to work.
yeah, totally.
So you might be a little bit ahead on that column.
But it's like a great, like, keeps me involved in the industry. Um, it keeps me outside because otherwise I'd just basically be a slave to my desk. Um, and agriculture is really my true passion. I mean, I love building websites and technology and stuff, but agriculture is really what I love to do.
Still skiing?
Yeah, I still ski. We actually live at Bridger Bowl. We got really lucky and found a house right at the base of the ski hill way before the craze happened, and it was kind of a rundown little cabin. It was shrouded in trees and kind of an unassuming little place. We got a really good deal on it, and now it's right at the ski hill, so we can go out the door and get a few laps in at lunch, and then get back home.
You just like jump on your snow machine and run to the top of the hill and ski down?
You can actually just walk out and put your skis on and go down to the chair.
Oh,
And
and then
then,
there's a chair that brings you back up.
yeah. Yeah, because Bridger Bowl is right there. So they have, I think, 7 chairs. It's more like 2,700 acres or something.
So from a chair, can you ride a chair up and then ski right back down to your house?
Yeah.
That's legit. That's legit.
And that, like, that we, like people think of that and they're like, oh man, these guys are like loaded. But no, we found this place it's like 1,000 square feet. It has one bathroom. It was
That's
built in
perfect.
1976. We have 3 kids, the dog, so it's cozy.
Probably a little snug, but what? So I got to ask, like, another podcast I listen to is up around whitefish, and he's been talking off and on for the last year about all the people moving in. You mentioned it earlier into your area. How, uh, well, I guess before we get into that, just down in Wyoming, like around Jackson Hole, I've heard that real estate prices in Jackson Hole, like median home price now is over $1 million in Jackson Hole. And there's
I bet.
people like that have had their rent doubled this
Yeah,
in the last 12 months.
yeah, it's a real issue because there's like not. I mean, any working class normal person has a really hard time living at any of these resort towns anymore. Like nobody can. I could never go home to Vail and move back there if I wanted to. I could never afford a house here now if I wanted to. We got lucky and got in before everything took off. Um, and the median home price here in Bozeman is like $820,000. Yeah, and then if you go to Big Sky, the median single family home price there is 3.5 million. So
Wow.
I bet you in Jackson Hole it's more like 5 or 6 because it's crazy. And then Aspen I think 5.
How fast are they building houses around Bozeman, or how fast are properties turning over?
Um, so in terms of the real estate market, I think it's slowed down quite a bit just because of the interest rates and all that stuff. But the development is still just, I mean, full bore ahead. It seems like they're if you go east, I mean west of town, that's where the majority of the development can happen because that's all farmland out there. Um, every, I mean, town used to end kind of just past 7th Street and 19th. 19th was getting fairly developed when I first moved here. And then now you go way past that, and it's just like housing development after housing development after housing development.
I think that's one of the interesting things about, when you do get when you get a couple of gray hairs in your beard, maybe a couple above the ears, and you go back to some places that you became familiar with as a young man or a young adult. And then we go back and we look at them, it's like, wow, town used to end here. And now there's
Yeah.
another 5 miles of it. And then you go to a small town and you're like, well, I remember when that was a Dillon's. I remember when we had a Safeway and an Alco and 16
Yeah.
more stores and half a Main Street's boarded up that used to not be. And it's kind of like, dang, what happened to this town? And then you get just on the outside of town and you see that freaking yellow sign that says Dollar General.
Yeah. I mean, that's perfect example of like Lexington where my dad grew up. You know, it was I don't know what the population was before IBP moved in, but then IBP moved in, Iowa Beef Packers, which is now Tyson, right?
Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
and the town doubled in population then, and then there used to be like a Pomida, and then all Main Street was a vibrant little Main Street, and we went back there last summer for my uncle's funeral, and like just like you said, half of Main Street has the windows are boarded up, and the old places that we used to go to for lunch or dinner are not there, and it's just like a super Walmart.
Well, My wife and I were driving yesterday and made this observation. We were driving through a town that had seen more prosperous days, and this wide 4-lane street, and it was kind of like an old industrial commercial part of town. And let's say maybe I mean, there are vacant lots and there's a lot of vacant buildings. Okay. And you drive around enough, you kind of get a sense of, when everything was built. Like, that late 50s cinder block building style with flat roofs
Yeah.
and big windows. That's what this whole place that's what this whole street is lined with on both sides. And 3/4 of them are abandoned. And the
Yeah.
ones that aren't are like they're on their third business. It's like the third business to be there and try to make a go in that location. And then the other side of town is completely, that's where they're building everything. The north and north side and east side is where every town seems to be growing that has room to grow that way. Just an idle observation. Uh, the increasing land costs with in resort towns, that's just another symptom of kind of an overall sickness in the economy and a disparity between productivity of land and what it's valued at and what people will actually pay for it. It's you can see two sides of the coin. I can see two sides of the coin. Like if somebody came to me and was like, "Hey, town's coming this way. We want to carve off like 100 acres right here along the highway and plat it for houses. Would you sell it to us?" You know, for what they're going to be starting to offer on a per acre price, it'd be a pretty tempting deal. Like even to get in on as a partner and be like, okay, you don't buy it from me. I'm in as a partner. And as you
Right.
sell these, you get this percentage, I get this percentage. And as they, demand goes up, you start getting more and more money for the more desirable stuff. Well, that's a win for you. And maybe,
Mm.
as a rancher, and it helps keep that rancher, maybe it's helping him provide cash flow to secure the land some other way or secure the rest of the land for another generation. I think a lot of guys are also just cashing out too.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly reasonable. But where it's all leading us, and this is something I've really been thinking about the last couple of weeks, is we're so far down this road of a culture of tenant farmers and ranchers. There's very, very few owner operators left. Like I've kind of been looking, and I know several, but we're the minority of people that are in my contacts book. And
Yeah.
I I don't know how we missed it. We were sleeping, we were distracted, worried about other stuff, and now we turn around and there's no owner operators left. I was talking to my county commissioner, one of my county commissioners last week, and he said that over 40% of the land base in our county is owned by out of state hunters, not people, not out of state or out of area ranches. Just 40% of the land was owned by out of state hunters.
Yeah. Just as a hunting property.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they pay a manager or something to manage that land, or do they,
Mm,
you know,
the way I'm going to translate and answer that question, they pay somebody to go out and put in food plots, put up game cameras, and fill their corn feeders.
yeah,
That's now I'm painting things with a very, very broad brush here. But
sure.
in my experience, that's what our out of state deer hunter landowner neighbors do. They generally don't maintain their fences because, well, they don't have cows. So why should they worry about their fence?
Mhm.
They don't graze their grass. They let invasive cedar trees clog it up. And they and they also raise everybody's tax basis, right? Because
Yeah.
every time these deer hunters decide they're going to trade one of their hunting properties, it raises my tax basis because there's not a separate recreational land use tax classification in Kansas.
Yeah.
That's so there was a property in between where I live and my ranch. That's about 4 miles away from 4 miles away from where I'm sitting and probably 4 miles, 4 to 5 miles away from my closest fence line. Now, this piece of property hasn't had a cow on it as long as I've known it. At least 15 years, it hasn't had a cow on it. It missed the big fire in 2016. So the Anderson Creek wildfire, this was just on the outside of it. So it hasn't been burned since probably the last giant wildfire that came through this area was in the 60s. So that would have been the last time it could have possibly burned, was in the 60s.
Wow.
It traded for, let's see, it traded for double what the last piece of pasture ground traded for in this country. And then like the pasture was about 10 miles away from this property I'm talking about. And it just traded a couple months ago, and this deer hunter property it traded back in the spring. But they paid more than double, almost 3 times what the pasture ground traded for just a couple of weeks ago.
I mean,
and I look at that, I just think, like, this is somebody, these are people that are coming from, Louisiana and Florida, and they're looking at their land price and they're like, yeah, that's pretty good. And they come out here, they hunt deer for a couple of years, and they flip it to make money on it and get their investment back. Just raises my taxes. And they're not necessarily good neighbors. And it bothers me when you go to town and people are like, well, they bring in a lot of money to the local economy. They bring in a lot of local money to the local economy. Well, our brand new packing plant brings in 4 jobs. It brings in the opportunity for me to spend more money in this community, for me to like produce product in this community that's generate wealth in this community versus exporting it. That was a different rabbit trail. Wow. But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, I guess the where I want to take this is, city managers will look at Walmart. Walmart will say, we want to build a new ultra Walmart in your town. And city managers will fall all over themselves, be like, well, we'll give you a 4-lane road right into that sucker. We'll give you your own stoplight timed.
Yep.
We'll run the utilities for you and give you 20 years off your taxes. Just build your Walmart in our town. But tell them go to your city council and say, I want to open a small meat packing plant that's going to bring 5 jobs to the community. They fought my friend the whole way.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's not fair. It took 2 years. It took 2 years from the first time he went to the city council to actually have a building built. It should be quicker than that. It should be easier than that. But there's so many roadblocks towards, small business or independent business trying to do something in a community, because the community leaders, they're like, why should we waste 10 hours working on your project when we can spend 20 hours working on the Walmart project, which is going to bring in more benefit to the community?
Yeah. But then what I've seen, there's been a super Walmart built in my hometown where I grew up, and then my dad's hometown, and it has just long-term negative effects. Right. It's hard, but then also, I listened to that, the podcast with Logan, and how it said that, the Dollar General or whatever came in, and the local businesses, the local grocer was worried that they were going to lose 20% of their business right off the top. But then he ended up kind of retaining the higher value customers, right? And so now he can get his kombucha and better produce and stuff like that. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's like a net positive, but
I guess that could be one way to look at, Dollar General. Our local grocery store several years ago, they built a new store, and it's awesome. Like, I mean, it's awesome. We're glad to have it in town. They're a little higher. I mean, they're higher than Dillon's. They're higher than Walmart. We still try to shop there because they're local. Dollar General opened up right down the street. And then, I last year on the other end of town, well, the other end of town being a mile away on the other end of the street, there's a Family Dollar Tree or whatever, whatever those two combinations are. So we not only have a Dollar General that's selling, all the processed packaged crap. We've got two other stores in town that sell the Chinese rejects. My friend Mike Calicrate, when he says that Walmart killed Main Street and Dollar General comes in to pick the carcass clean, gosh, the more I look at what's happened to our rural towns, the more I see that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like you've discussed in the past, they're like a food desert. And the irony of we feed the world. You know, yeah, you go to basically any small town in rural America and you can't get a decent vegetable,
Definitely not at Dollar General. Our grocery store is pretty good. Yeah, it's a problem, and hopefully it's one that we'll find some solutions on and people will start working on. But so back to kind of the conversation about the deer hunter and recreational property. Similar to what you guys deal with up there in the mountains on federal lands, like log it, graze it, or watch it burn.
Mhm.
It's the same thing here on the plains. I mean, where I'm at right now, headspace wise, is I feel really good about the amount of forage we've grown this year. I feel great about it. I'm also really terrified of the amount of forage that we've grown this year.
Yeah.
Because we're about ready to hit the winter drought, and it's going to be a long time till we get green grass again. And there's going to be a lot of brown stuff that'll burn really well for a lot of months between now and then. So
Sure.
I'm a little concerned about wildfires. I'm going to be out over the next couple of months mowing fire guards. Not necessarily because I'm worried about a wildfire, but because I'm planning on burning. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not committed yet, not 100% committed yet to burning. I'll say that on the podcast, but like in my head, we're going to light a bunch of stuff on fire next year. It'll reduce the fuel load a little bit, but it'll also really stimulate next year's grass production. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm excited about and hopefully I'll be able to kill a few trees, clean up some new ones that have come since the last wildfire. This is a totally different context though. The forest in the Mountain West, okay, like the fire that you were talking about, lightning started that fire. Lightning would start that fire whether or not you or I were here.
Yep.
The question is, would it have been less severe if we hadn't been managing the forest in the West for the last 100 years like we have, or let's just say 200? Or would it have been, no, what, forget that. Because that didn't even make sense. Didn't even
No,
make sense to me.
I think it does make sense because, there's been a lot of mismanagement of the forest up here, right? Um, I, I mean, there's always been grazing and logging, but if it's on public lands, the logging is a very bureaucratic process and hard to get established. It has to go through a lot of committees and comment periods and all sorts of stuff. So the privately managed lands you see are managed much better than the public. And this fire burned a lot of public land, which is there's a lot of overgrown forest in the canyon up there until you hit basically the ranch. And so
Which is
the
privately managed.
privately managed, yeah. So the operation that I work for originally started out as 7,000 acres, and then a new owner took over 4 or 5 years ago. No, 7 years ago, and then 4 or 5 years ago they purchased 19 additional thousand acres of ROI timberland, which had been primarily logged, but then also grazed. But not, I wouldn't say grazed in an exceptional manner, right? It's very understocked, probably overutilized, like the cattle overgraze certain portions of it really hard. Um,
That'll happen
but
when you set stock of pasture.
yeah, and uh, but still, there's much less deadfall in those forests compared to what the kind of the public forest, it's all BLM or Forest Service kind of around that. And there has been quite a few logging projects in the bridgers just to mainly reduce spruce budworm, which is a bad insect that's killing a lot of the spruce trees around here. But so they've made kind of an effort to get rid of those, and there has been grazing throughout. But still, I would say, you can look to some of the forests in Colorado where I'm from, and I mean, it's just a matchbox. Like, and I'm surprised it hasn't burned yet. Like the lodgepole forests are so overgrown and thick. But yeah, I think
I didn't get there this year, but the last couple of years, I've spent some time out in central and southwest Colorado, like the San Juans and
yeah,
towards Loveland, um, jeeping up in the mountains, and just the vast, vast tracts of beetle kill. I look
yeah.
at that and go, "Oh man, I wouldn't even want to walk through there with a lit cigarette."
Well, you would know the area that I'm talking about. Like when you come into like Silverthorne area before heading down to Breck, it's up to the north there.
Yep.
There's like Buffalo Mountain, but then you go north into Granby and Grand Lake and all that. In that area, if you fly over that with a plane, it's the whole forest is basically dead just with beetle kill. And I, I don't, I could be a scientist that I was talking to one day. He said that those lodgepole forests typically go in like 140-year fire cycles, but they haven't hit one of those 140-year fire cycles. So that would typically be what cleans it up. And it's just like anything, we spend billions of dollars on fighting the symptoms, but not the problem.
When we could go, yeah, we could spend billions and billions, or we could make a little bit, letting people log it, maybe even do some strategic logging to make fire breaks around stuff.
Yeah,
But there was people calling for more government control of land and more government control of agriculture don't understand what BLM lands are like, what lands are like in the Western US, and how poorly managed they are.
well, or how big they are, really, right?
Right.
There's just so much land. It's not. Well, I was actually thinking about doing this for mainly. I mainly just use Instagram as kind of my outlet.
Right.
But I talked about a section of the ranch the other day that's real overgrown, and it's not feasible to mechanically clear that, right? So, and that's just like 10 acres right there. So I don't think people have a grasp on the size and scope of the lands around here. And then if you were to say, okay, we'll let the government control this, but then what does that do? That shifts the burden to us as taxpayers to pay for that. And then how is it even going to get managed? Because it's going to take such a long time to create a management plan and go through the bureaucracy of cleaning that up, that it's going to be years and years down the road. A lot of litigation, I would imagine.
Can't imagine
So
any environmental groups have anything to say about federal lands.
yeah, so and then I I was kind of thinking about just kind of going back to your topic about the landowners purchasing the hunting lands, and it's not always the case here, but I am seeing a trend in the western region here where people are buying ranches and they realize they don't want to just throw cash at it, right? So they do want it to like operationally cash flow. And they do realize that, or I think they're starting to realize that livestock in some form of grazing and timber management is a good way to generate income and not just throw money at the place and also keep it healthy. So there are large ranches around here that have been bought and sold that are going through those processes, but at the same time, it's not helping the generational rancher, right? Because the property taxes, once it's flipped, are going up again because the value of the land is going up. Um, and so, yeah, the generational owner around here is becoming few and far between.
And more of a transition towards tenant farmers and tenant ranchers managing for an absentee landowner, or even a present landowner,
Yeah,
but just having ownership and management disconnected and on different levels, living in different houses, it makes it difficult to have, for meaningful change, unless there's a lot of really open and honest communication about
yeah,
what ownership's goals are, what management needs are to accomplish those goals.
yeah. And then also, it's if you are, let's say, come from a blue collar background of ranching, even if you've been like basically, if your father was the manager of a place, didn't own it, um, and then there is still, it's hard to describe, but there is a disconnect between someone who's like a billionaire that can just purchase a ranch and you as a person who knows the area, knows the land, kind of has grown up in that. It's hard to like describe the disconnect, but there is definitely like a there's a rift in like the communication, right? Not always, and I'm generalizing, but it seems like there is some kind of out of touch. Somebody who is like one of these newly formed ranchers that has come out here and was like, well, I want to buy a ranch, that they just, I don't know how to say this without like being sounding kind of offensive, but
Watch too much
um
Yellowstone.
yeah, it's just like there is a weird difference in communication, just in the way that you see things, the way, um and I'm not saying that if you grew up ranching all that you just are, the like are a step ahead, but um I guess I'm saying like the old time people that I know that owned large ranches seemed very down to earth and lived quite humbly. Like the old manager that had the place that I work on now, they had a very small house, very humble beginnings. His kids worked the land. The manager was instructed not to give them any slack, like treat them just like employees. And it doesn't seem like that's quite the same with most of these people that are buying ranches now.
Okay. Just thinking about that for a minute, and if
Yeah.
I can have anything relatable, and it does, the properties that trade around here just seem to trade to deer hunters, and
Uh,
it maybe that might be a nice change to have a new neighbor that wants to be a rancher instead of somebody that's just going to come out here and hunt deer.
yeah. Yeah. Um, and then I was also thinking like, there's a in rural America, we were talking about how, towns are kind of dilapidated and stuff, but do you also see like an opportunity for, younger people to like move back there and start businesses and
Yes, but I can't put my finger on anything specific.
okay.
And I think that burden is on us,
Yeah.
as middle-aged men and the older generation. The burden is on us to help create opportunities and help support younger folks that want to come out to small towns and do manufacturing or do value add or get into agriculture, or have some sort of business that's going to add value to the community. We've had too much of a brain drain, too much of a labor drain, with too much of our talent going to town for too long. And
Yeah.
that's a consequence of get bigger, get out. I think that's
Well,
100%
and I
the consequence of get bigger, get out.
I would also say too, that agriculture hasn't done itself any favors by, like the old generation just kind of, were some of them, quite a few of them were very difficult to work for, not a lot of days off. And kind of always telling the narrative of like, well, this is the lifestyle, but you're not going to make any money. And it hasn't been very appealing for a lot of people to be like, why should I continue that?
And there was a whole generation, which we're part of, that was told, you've got to go to college. You got to go to college. You got to have a degree. You got to do something with your life.
Yeah.
I never did. Maybe that explains why I am where I am, but that's another story. And, then that morphed into, well, we'll just pay for college for everybody. If we want
Hmm.
everybody to have a degree, we'll just make sure everybody can get college loans. We'll just pay for everybody to go to college. Now we've got federal backed student loans for everybody. Um, 15, 20 years down the line, where do we end up? We got a student debt crisis where people are screaming for their student debts to be forgiven because they didn't really read the contract when they signed up. They weren't responsible with how much they borrowed. And now they're in a position that they can't afford to pay back a loan they took out. Like, I'm sorry, that's not my problem. That's legitimately not my problem as a US taxpayer.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have been in that position. But we decided that we were gonna tell everybody they had to have a college degree, and then we made it so everybody could go to college, which is great. And then we made so the government will back behind everybody's loan, not pay for everybody to go to college. The government's going to guarantee that loan will get paid back. Natural thing for colleges to do is do what? Jack tuition. I
Hmm.
mean, tuition is compared to the cost of living 20 years ago when you and I would have been college age. Cost of tuition compared to the cost of living has gone up way faster, like stratospheric. It's skateboard ramp looking. It's
Yeah.
just insane. And we ended up with like, I, I, I just have a hard time as a taxpayer thinking that, that some of my tax dollars are going to go to pay for someone's liberal arts degree that cost them $120,000 and they can't pay it off because they're working at McDonald's and demanding $25 an hour. I,
Hmm.
we've got way too many people that are in that position, and
Yeah.
it, I don't know how we unwind it.
Yeah. I don't either.
I don't know, but how do we get more people to come back to rural America? Like electricians, plumbers, welders. I mean, we need all of those people to keep society running. How much longer are we going to need a liberal arts major or an artificial intelligence prompt engineer? Like, how many more
Hmm.
years are those jobs going to be necessary? I can guarantee you that a guy that can stick two pieces of metal together is going to be in demand for a long time. A guy that knows how to bite wires and stick them together and make the electrons do the right thing, that guy's going to be in demand for a long time.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Speaking of technology, I don't know if you researched this, but I tried to develop a mobile cattle marketing app at one point.
Okay. No, I actually didn't come across that in my research this morning.
Yeah. Well, it started as so I have a good friend who owns and runs the IX Ranch in Big Sandy, Montana, named
Okay.
Rich Roth. And he's a cool guy. Um, and after TCU, when I was at TCU, that's where I learned how to use Excel. And so then we created a management plan, and I did one on a ranch up here in Montana. Just basically a business plan for your ranch. But what we would do is run all these spreadsheet and create all these like cattle budgets and kind of crop budgets and whatever, but then print them off and put them in a notebook. And so that seemed pretty silly to me. I'm like, why do we print the numbers out of a spreadsheet and put it into a notebook? That's just like counterintuitive, right?
Right.
So I was like, and this is like
Because
the
grazing
time,
records are hard.
yeah. But at the time, this is like when cloud computing was kind of a hot topic. And so I was like, well, why can't I create an online version of this where you can just go and like keep your numbers live and kind of keep a working plan online. So Rich and Rich actually had a family member that went to MIT and then came back to the ranch, and it's a sizable ranch. They run about 4,500 mother cows.
I need to take a real quick break.
Okay.
Be right back.
Yep.
Sorry about that. We're back.
No worries.
So you're saying your software, your friend MIT.
Yeah, so I was talking about Rich and the IX ranch, and the MIT graduate came back to the ranch, and I was saying it's a sizable operation. It's like 4,500 mother cows on a, roughly 130,000 acres or so. But he was just like, well, cows are widgets that eat grass, and they're confined to a pasture that has a measurable amount of grass in it. And he built a pretty cool software for the time. Um, and so Rich and I tried to upgrade it, and that's just how I learned design, because I taught myself Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. And so I did like the mock-ups for what a web-based platform would look like, and then tried to hire an engineer to help us build it.
How
It
much
turns
fun was
out,
it trying to get the engineer to speak the language of livestock?
you know, once he figured out that, like, the consumption and kind of the production forage and all that stuff, it like kind of turned it into math. But they're really, what was the biggest prohibitor at the time is that, nowadays there's like the no code revolution, where there's a lot of software that does really really cool things without writing code. But at the time,
That
that was
doesn't
kind
make
of just
sense.
taken off. Yeah, it doesn't, but it's cool. I mean, we can talk about that after this part, but um, at the time, you had to write the entire application through with, using a programming language, like jQuery or Python or something like that. So it was like cost prohibitive at the time, because we estimated it to be roughly $350,000 to make this software. And so there's not a rancher in the world that was going to say, sure, I'll give you that money, because they didn't find a lot of value in it, right?
Right.
And there wasn't a venture capitalist that understood ranching well enough to be like, oh, yeah, I see that your value proposition is worth it. So,
Why do I need to pay you $350,000 to build this? I can just go buy legal pads and little red books.
yeah, that's kind of the standpoint from the rancher, right? Um, and and I didn't communicate the value proposition well enough, and I still don't know if I could, about why it's cool to have data. I personally think it's cool to have data, and you like see it over time. But I'm a very small. I'm not a big enough. There's not enough people like me to make it worthwhile, right? And that might be now, because there's softwares like AgroWeb and stuff that have come out that seem to be doing pretty well. I don't know.
Pasture map. There's, I mean, my grazing is pretty good. Uh,
Yeah,
cattle max does some different stuff. There's a 701X. They've got some pretty good software too. So
yeah,
they're out there. So kind of like you, I had an idea, and this was in 2008, and like had these little Dell kind of Palm Pilot pocket computer things. I mean, it's
yeah,
the iPhone. It's kind of
yeah. I
crazy.
remember those. You could write on them.
Yeah, yeah. So, and you could put Excel on them.
Yeah,
So I started taking Dad's grazing records and grazing charts that he'd been using, and trying to make an Excel spreadsheet, and then trying to figure out how to write the formula to put the formula in the Excel spreadsheet so I could get actionable information back out. That was a little bit beyond me, but I did spend, like, I filled out, I just kept writing and writing my ideas down on, how things should work and why I would want things, and two notebooks, and just kind of threw it over on the shelf. Um, but yeah, like being able to have data in your fingertips. Like for me, knowing what my forage inventory is, my move records, I keep all that stuff in Pasture Map, and it's great.
yeah,
And it's map based, which is like, that appeals to me because I'm a visual person. I like
yeah,
maps. You show me on a map, you give me data in a graph or on a map, like I can get that. You show me a spreadsheet, and I'll still figure it out. I'm just going to have to stare at it for a while before I figure out what's what and get the numbers and information out of it. But I I was involved with Pasture Map with Christine Sue at Pasture Map, helping
Yeah,
build.
I was just going to say because I'd met Christine because we were kind of working in at the we were building this at the same time,
Right.
but she had obviously um, came from Stanford and had some more development resources at her fingertips and
Yep. Yep. I think that's what made it successful is she had some venture capital that she could sell it to that helped her build the app. And
yeah.
it's a good app. I still use it every day.
And now it's a San Antonio based group, right, that owns it or that runs it.
Yes, it's part of I think it's Scale Works or Soil Works
uh,
now, which is
yeah,
under the
so it
same
works.
umbrella as Range Ward and Grassroots
Mhm.
Carbon and Powerflex Fence. I think they own that too now.
Okay.
No, I'm just waiting for him to buy an Energizer company. Then I should just make one phone call and get all my crap. Not really, but
Yeah, so that well, we got into that, but I think I was trying to segue into like the mobile app that we did we developed it. And I came up with this idea because I was uh living on a ranch in Stevensville, Montana, and the owner would sell his cattle to a farmer feeder out in Iowa every year. Um, and then, one day I was out there and I was like, "Hey, Dick, why don't I have a phone in my pocket and I have all the health records and whatever on a spreadsheet in my phone that's in a Google Drive folder." I was like, I'll just take a video of these cattle and we can kind of use it like a simple, I mean, a superior livestock kind of set up and just send this to Joe.
right.
And we did that. And, Joe was like, wow, this is cool. I get to see a video of the cattle. I get to get some data. And he's like, that'd be kind of cool to have a technology like this. So we, made the software where you could take some pictures. It didn't have video capability, but like if you look at a superior on the website, like a lot, and you see the kind, the class, where they're located, what the shrink is, all that. Yeah, you'd fill in that form and then post it to like a marketplace. And it got some traction, but really what we underestimated is just the value of the representative out there because there's a lot of I guess I'd say shady players out there that are trying to trade cattle.
In
So you
this
want somebody
business,
repping them.
no, never.
So it never that didn't really take off. And then our developer got a job at 10x his salary elsewhere. So of course we were like, well, yeah, you should take that. But
It's
and I
complicated.
yeah, it's complicated. And I've been trying to think about ways to incorporate technology into the ranching industry ever since. And it's always on top of my mind. But
I'm all in favor of incorporating technology as long as we maintain our basic husbandry skills, which I think in the
well,
industry have been lost by and large. And do you get what I'll let you talk.
no, I totally get what you're saying. And also don't just create technology for the sake of creating technology, right? Like if there's actually a real problem that could be solved that provides value to many, many ranchers, then I think it'd be worthwhile to pursue. But I haven't really found that yet.
So, example of technology that comes to mind would be virtual fence collars or
Yeah.
tracking ear tags, not necessarily to control movement, but just to know where they're at and then have a health heartbeat, right?
Yeah.
For me, those don't make sense. I mean, I could maybe justify the location tag and heartbeat so I could get a grazing heat map data.
Yeah.
That would be like, show me a grazing heat map of how my pasture was grazed. Please, I want that information. Like
Yeah.
that would be good stuff. Um, but like as far as having a virtual fence collar, for me, that doesn't make sense. I can't noodle that from a cost benefit standpoint. I can accomplish that objective a lot cheaper and easier with polywire or with semi-permanent electric fence.
Yeah.
For
See, I
you,
think
but for somebody up
for
in the mountains, I
yeah,
could definitely see a use case for collars. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say that because just the terrain and the challenge of building fence or even putting up polywire, whatever makes it difficult. And I hope that I get to, stay on this place long enough to like implement some of that stuff or at least experiment with it. Because I do think there's some cool opportunities that could be had there because, the owner has um, obviously the pocketbooks that if he wanted to kind of experiment with some of that stuff and I justified like why I think it'd be worthwhile, I think he'd be interested in putting some money towards it. And also I think he is interested in maintaining the operation as a ranch for the long term too. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to try to do some like real high intensity or management intensity grazing in like forested areas and use like a combination of like, okay, what would happen if we logged this and then grazed it right after that and then did some cool management stuff along those terms and see what the results are in terms of kind of weed mitigation and forage production.
Yeah, for sure. And I know I'm all over the place, but so the place you're on compared to the public land across the fence line. Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of have a picture in my head that the place you work for looks more like silvopasture. I mean, there's big trees, but there's space in between. There's probably some forage on the ground. The other side of the fence will have the same big trees, twice the number of small trees, and 4 times the number of baby trees, and no forage on the forest floor.
Yeah, it's a pretty good assumption. There are areas next to the ranch that have had logging projects happen within the last 40 years, so they're a little better shape. But then there's also places that haven't, that have been kind of untouched, and they look just like that, or like dense lodge pole stands with a lot of deadfall. That I mean, it looks like you took a bunch of matches and just dropped them.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
What's
that's what that looks like.
what's the logging like? Is it like clear cut or is it selective falling and thinning?
All of that stuff in the canyon there has all been like selective logging. So
So you just have big naked blocks on the mountain.
there are there are there are very few patches of just big naked blocks, and most of it has been selective logged. So there are, like it's a Doug for like evergreen forest, but there's predominantly Doug firs, and so those are big, up to I think they around here they get up to like almost 200 feet tall. Um, the big ones do. Not all. There's not that many of those, but uh, in those areas that have been selectively logged, it's pretty wide open. There's a pretty good amount of grass that grows underneath them, and then there's also some decent sized aspen stands. And the aspen trees are pretty cool because they allow pretty ample light to reach the floor, and so there's a good amount of grass that grows in them, and they retain moisture pretty well.
Is it just the quaking aspen that's a single organism, or is that all aspen trees that are
It's
connected?
all it's all aspen trees, and the largest aspen stand it's called Pando. It's out in Utah.
Can you
Um,
explain that for people that aren't familiar?
yeah, and actually, I think Pando is the oldest um, aspen stand, and it's estimated at like 80,000 years old. So it's one of the oldest living organisms, but also one of the largest. And so I think in southern Utah, also in like the San Juans of Colorado, so the aspen tree is just one organism, and it's a rhizomatous root, so it just sends up shoots. Um, and that's why it's very resilient to fires. Like when a fire comes through, it invigorates the growth, and then more aspens kind of grow. But yeah, it's not the largest living organism on Earth. I think there's a fungus, like a mushrooms, that's the largest, and then I think the quaking aspen tree is the largest single living organism on Earth.
I think they call it the largest air breathing organism on Earth.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if if like when you're in the San Juans here coming up within the next week or two or next 3 weeks or so is like the peak season when the aspens just turn like vivid orange and yellow. And
Now that you say that, I remember that we took like I think it was a scenic train ride out of Leadville,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they were talking about that this grove of aspens will turn a week before that grove, which will turn before that grove, and they'll all three be different colors. And that's how we tell them apart is when they turn and what color they turn. And that's
okay. Yeah, I know there's a bunch of different species of aspens, but I don't know that much about them. Even though I've grown up, I know that they're a heck of a place to take a nap.
okay. So since we're talking about brush, I'm kind of wanting to circle back. You're talking about like there's a little corner that's hard to get into, be very difficult to mechanize clear. It's 10 acres. I've got plenty of places like that. I just don't go over and look at them. I don't dwell on them. But I was thinking about that in like the context of if that was on the federal side of the fence. Okay. So the forest ranger that's in charge of it, he looks at it, he sees the problem, he makes his report, he gives it to his boss. His boss, okay, this is a problem. Let's go look at it. They go out and they look at it. Okay, make a plan to deal with it. Makes a plan to deal with it, gives it to the boss. Boss goes, okay, this is great. We got to take it to the committee. Committee looks at it, reviews, make these changes. Okay, we make these changes. Go back to the committee. All right, approved. Now we're going to submit it for funding. And like has to go through all these processes and all through these steps and judicial and review and funding and then all the environmental group challenge. And by the time they can actually do something, there's 15 other problems stacked up on top of the original problem. And the original solution that now they have money for 5 years later is not effective.
Yeah, because it's grown 10x or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the environmental groups will turn around and say, well, that project didn't work because it was ineffective and that was a waste of money. Well, it was a waste of money because it was 5 years too late because you held it up in lawsuits. I just federal government doesn't make anything better. Like if somebody can name me a federal department or a government program that is efficient, effective, and a good use of taxpayer dollars, I will probably eat my hat without salt.
That wouldn't taste very good.
Well, if you want to see me eat my hat without salt, like let's show it to me. Show me a federal project, piece of property, program that's well run, efficient, and cost effective and a good use of taxpayer dollars. And I'll show you me eating a hat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frustrating because yeah, it's just you can with the private lands just things happen so much more quickly. And it's also frustrating here too, I guess, if because if that place exists next to you, then that's obviously kind of a threat, right? And there's not a lot you can do about it.
I generally like to take a threat and turn that around and see if I can make that into an opportunity or a strength. But
Uh,
if the federal government was my neighbor, that'd be an awful hard. That'd be a tough row to hoe, I think.
and out here in Montana and Colorado, whatever, there's a significant amount of public land. So
Is the public I know in some places like Utah, the public land, private land situation is kind of like a checkerboard. Like,
yeah, that's the same here. The way it was originally laid out, or the townships and the sections are all originally checkerboarded.
okay. Um, Corner crossing. What's
That's a
your thoughts on
contention.
let's talk about corner crossing for a minute since you've got some
Yeah,
experience, it sounds like.
it's a contentious issue. I don't. my brother knows a lot about it just because he's a professional hunting guide and guides on
Uh,
private.
What's this like for the listeners? Like, what's the situation with the corner crossing thing from the 30,000 foot view, and then maybe talk about it from your perspective?
So here in the West, like we just said, the private and public land is set up in a checkerboard pattern. So let's say the southwest corner is private. That would mean that the northeast corner is private, and then the southeast and the northwest would be public. And then at that junction of the four corners, supposedly you can cross there if you're on block management trying to get to the next piece of public land. And it was recently taken to court, and I can't speak much into detail on this because I don't know the specifics, but I know it went to court in
I
Wyoming.
think it's an
And
ongoing issue, and there's a
yeah.
lot of nuances, and
Hmm.
there's the landowners are fighting it in a very very strange way. It seems like.
Yeah, so some guy, a private landowner, sued somebody who corner crossed for whatever, saying that his feet swung into his property. But that's basically the people who are for it. It's like I'm going from one piece of public land to the next, and I'm not physically touching your private property. But then the private property owners are saying, no, you're at some point you're touching my fence or you're going through my property over it, but nobody owns the air above the property. I don't know.
Because the theory is that where property lines intersect, it's an infinitesimally small point. Like it's an
Yeah.
infinitely small point where they intersect.
Yeah.
And if you're going from one corner to the other, you can't help but cross through the physical airspace of the
Yep.
private property that's on the adjacent sides.
True.
But then, and it's part of the landowning custom. I get it that, the air above it is mine too, and I own everything down to the earth's core. Okay, that's a legitimate viewpoint. We're not going to argue or debate that. And like I said, it's a complex issue. I don't personally have to deal with it. Kansas
Yeah.
is 97+% privately owned, and the state owns 2.5%, and the feds own like a little tiny chunk. And we're
Hmm.
cool with that. But that's not the situation for a lot of folks that, not only listen to this podcast, but also live in that part of the world. And I since the whole corner crossing thing kind of came into the public consciousness over the last couple of years, and that big court case you mentioned, that's kind of my only experience with it. And it seems like I'm not sure how I would come down on it. I'm not sure how I would feel if that was my land and it was checkerboarded in with a bunch of BLM land.
Yeah.
So at most of those corners, is there some kind of a marker? Is there a fence? Is there a stone? Or is it
A lot of
just in
times,
the
if it's like
pasture?
yeah, it could be just a post, but if it's at like a township or section or whatever, there could be like a concrete marker, or some kind of survey marker, or like a reference tree, or something like that. But really, there's not on most of it. There's not anything other than just the land itself. And there's Onyx these days that you can use to pinpoint where you're at. Um,
That's
but
only
yeah,
going to
I
be
don't.
like 5 feet, though.
Yeah, true.
you know,
So
you could. I might not have a problem if you stepped over the corner onto the other corner of public land, but if you're 5 feet on my side, we might have an issue with that. So again, it's
uh,
one of those things that's like it's incredibly complicated and nuanced, and it sounds like a very very simple thing.
it does. Yeah, if you just think of, oh, I got to go from this corner to that corner, it sounds like a very simple thing, but then when you, like you say, you drill down into it, then it gets much more complex. So much so that it's just tied up in court.
Interesting to see how that comes down.
Yeah.
So I don't think we I don't think we agree on feedlots.
No, I mean, I don't say, I wouldn't say I disagree with you. Um,
Okay. I I'll say this. I think there's a lot of problems with feedlots, with big feedlots, like 10,000 small, 10,000, 1,000 head farmer feeders. I don't have a problem with you guys. It's like we talk about 50, 75, 100,000 head yards,
yep.
like corporate owned yards. Y'all are gross. Y'all got some problems. On the other hand, there's 8 point whatever billion people in the world. We got to continue to support the narrative of feed the world, which, we can also talk about that. But there's beef consumers in the world. There's beef demand in the world. We've got to
Yep.
meet that demand. And there's not a known pathway for the beef industry to transition to regenerative agriculture and
Yeah.
continue production. There's not a known pathway at this time. That's not saying we can't get there. That's not saying we can't figure it out. That's not saying we can't transition. Pathway, the pathway to get there right now is not clear. So the fact remains, feedlots are a thing. They're going to exist in the world for the foreseeable future. Like that, and we have to deal with that. Can I support them? And I think that's where it really comes down to. And for me, I think that has to be on an individual level.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. Like I'm not, I wouldn't defend just any feedlot, right? And um kind of where I go back to is the start of the feeding industry, how it kind of came about from feeding a byproduct that wasn't fit for human consumption, right? So um was it like,
You grow a couple fields of wheat that's not high enough protein or not clean enough to go to the
yeah,
mill. Sure, feed that to cows, barley,
or like
grain, whatever.
wheat midds or cottonseed hulls or whatever, like, it's a cool way to get rid of a byproduct that otherwise you couldn't really do much, right? And so no, I would agree with you on the scale, and I definitely would agree that there is a, like, the regenerative method is a, if there was a clear path to that, I would support that. Um, and but then I have seen some cool feedlots like Reeve Cattle Company. I don't know if you know of them out in Garden City. Um,
But
we,
there's a good feedlot out in Garden City.
I don't know if I'd say,
I'm
I don't know if
sorry.
you say good or, but it was interesting to see because we went there and they had a very complicated kind of lagoon system that captured all the waste, and then they would filter that and then put it back onto their crops that they had out surrounding the feedlot, and then turn that feed back into feed stuff for the cattle. But then the water would be recycled, and they had a, like a tilapia, like a fish growing program that they
Okay.
would run that water through. Um, and then they sold that fish. I can't remember. They sold it to a fish company. But then they had a cool science lab where they were doing a bunch of experiments. But I think feeding cattle just for the sake of feeding cattle, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, right? Like, and I understand that the consumer kind of dictates the market, right? Because as a whole, they've developed a taste for fed cattle. And when they, if they were to eat your beef, it would probably taste different than their grain finished prime beef steak from,
I know it tastes different.
yeah. And
It's
so,
supposed to. It's
yeah,
supposed to.
yeah. And I'd agree with you.
Your grass-fed beef will taste different than my grass-fed beef because we have different grass.
Yeah,
The reason beef tastes the same from New York to LA is because it all eats corn and soy.
yeah.
Mostly, yes, I know that's a generalization, but
But where I think we would definitely agree is I am wholeheartedly against, like, just cutting down huge swaths of the rainforest for soy production and corn production just to feed the livestock, you know, and palm oil and stuff like that.
should be more
Um,
of a thinning project and silvopasture in the rainforest.
right.
And then the American beef consumer wouldn't have to be upset that we're cutting down rainforest for, cow farming, or the
Yeah.
cow farts are warming the planet.
Speaking of that, have you heard of Alianza de Terra, which is there's this guy, John. He went to the TC Ranch Management Program, and I can't remember his last name, but he started this program with his wife because his wife grew up on a ranch in Brazil. She came to the TC Ranch Management Program. They met, and he moved back down there with her. But what Alianza de Terra does is I think they have like 70 or 80 million acres under kind of cooperative now, where all the ranchers there, um, they're more involved in like regenerative practices for the rainforest, and because they set aside a certain portion of their ranch as rainforest kind of in perpetuity, if I'm saying this correctly, or like that, kind of thinning for more of a dynamic approach, instead of just, I mean, because what the way John said it is like, if you don't have this, the economics is just going to come through and just wipe it out. So he's convinced a sizable amount of ranchers there to engage in this program. It's pretty cool. You should check it out.
Okay, we'll check that out. Um, so if you could start over on day one, your ranching career, what would you tell yourself, or what would you do different?
um, I think, if I could start over from day one, knowing what I know now, I think I initially approached it because I wanted like to be the cowboy lifestyle, you know, and wanted more to be like a horseman slash cowboy. And now I have absolutely zero interest in being a cowboy. Um, like I want to be like, I want to be involved in land management, and I understand that there's like some cowboying that comes with it. And I wear a cowboy hat outside, but that's just like for sun protection. It's just because I happen to have been gifted a silver belly hat for my birthday at one time, and I have it. But Yeah, I think I would approach it more from like a inquisitive. I mean, I've always been inquisitive about it, but and obviously all this type of pasture management that like you do and Hobbs and everybody's doing now wasn't really that popular even when I went to TCU Ranch Management. Um, but just come at it from more of a land manager standpoint, like how do I use this land to its highest capability, or what's the best use for it? And I guess I've kind of mainly approached it like that, but it was more originally because I wanted to just be on a ranch and kind of live the lifestyle. But now I'm very passionate about, well, this place, for instance. I would love to have the opportunity to improve it because right now it's been grazed kind of the same way it's been for the last 20 years. Um, Doing some innovative things there, maybe doing some more management intensive grazing like along the riparian areas to see how that happens, because there used to be a huge corridor of bison migration, so they would come through and I'm sure just wipe out the landscape for a little while.
Eat everything and not come back for a year.
Yeah. um and do something like that, and maybe some like a little more forward facing, because it's right at the highway that goes right through it, and so people are always kind of curious about what's going on there. um I guess if I owned the place, I would probably do some more community involved stuff, like bring people out and show them what we're doing, and like, or the school kids anyway, really try to get kids involved in this and like passionate about it, and also communicate to the community that this is a 30,000 acre ranch that's on the edge of town, that's really providing a lot of open space and wildlife habitat in kind of a buffer for development, because the canyon we live in, you can't develop anything smaller than a 40-acre property anymore, because the HOA has basically, the Canyon Association has set those limits.
Okay.
But there's still a lot of room for growth, and people would love to go that way.
Are you afraid that it's gonna be turned into house farms?
At this point, I'm not concerned because I think the owner has the better interest of the ag in mind. He has a few other ranches, and so I think he's into that stuff.
Okay,
Um, so
very cool.
and
You ready to
then
talk about your day job yet?
yeah,
So what's your day job? What actually pays the bills?
well, my day job is basically a website developer, and kind of I started out well when I was trying to develop that software. I learned how to design, and my dad was an artist, so I always was around art and stuff like that. But started out as a graphic designer, and then realized there was higher value in web development, so taught myself how to do that. And now I build, websites or web applications for various groups. I built an event management application for Yeti and their event management team. So they put on like, I don't know, 80 to 100 events every year that have, multiple moving pieces and different people at them, and assets that they bring, like tents and water and trucks. And so we use a software called Airtable, which is a cool platform that's a relational database that functions kind of like Excel. And they add all their events to that, and it's pushed into the web platform on the front end and presented kind of in a pretty fashion, for people that are like if they're just setting up the booth, they can go to the website and log in. You have to have a login and check like, oh, I need XYZ for supplies. And then the locations here, and this is the address to the Airbnb, and these are how we get our tickets. So that was one I just did, and I built it's just a marketing site, but the website for Matador Ranch and Cattle, which is the largest ranch in Montana, that was just acquired a few years ago by Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
That was kind of a funny story. I was headed down there to what I was under the impression that it was, kind of an interview about whether they were going to use me or not. And so we were headed down to the ranch, and I was talking to my buddy Rich, who owns the IX, and he's like just joking around. He's like, "Well, tell old Rupert hello." And we pull up, and the guy who's kind of in charge is like, "Well, I got to go get the boss," and he goes up and grabs Rupert Murdoch, and he walks into the room. And I was like, "Oh, this is kind of serious."
Didn't know it was
You
that
know,
kind of meeting.
21st richest individual on earth walks into the room and tells me that he needs a great brand and a great website. And I was like, obviously,
Do my best, sir.
sure. I was like, don't you have like 1,000 other people that do this for you? But anyway, that was kind of a weird, interesting experience, and just to have somebody of that notoriety tell you that, up to that point, I hadn't really had any major high profile, and not that the Matador Ranch and Cattle is a high profile site, but
I think at least 3 or 4 people that listen to this podcast have heard of it before.
yeah. So
Might even be some neighbors on the far side that I know.
yeah.
All right, very cool. We need to get out of here.
Okay.
Where can folks find you?
They can go to milhoandesign.com, just Milhoan design.com. And that's my phone number on the website. That's my email address. If you want to call me, you can. I probably won't answer just because I get a lot of spam, but if you leave a voicemail, I'll call you back. And then you can find, that's where my Instagram and social. I'm pretty active on Twitter, but I'm more involved in like kind of the tech community on Twitter. I don't know actually what I'm gonna do. Like, this year with Instagram, I've been really talking about agriculture because there's just so many more things that I can talk about on a daily basis. But when October roughly 23rd comes around and the cattle are shipped back to Twin Bridges, that's kind of my ranch job ends right there for the next 8 months.
I can see you're smiling and thinking about hitting the mountains and thinking about skiing.
Yeah, the snow is gonna be fun. I think that the people that follow me for the ranch content are kind of be like, wait, what happened to this dude?
Like, hey, I started following this guy. Like, he's been ranching all now. Now it's all about skiing. Now it's all about web design. Whatever. And we are who we are.
Yeah.
Is it good? Do you have a good forecast for snow this winter? Does it look like it's going to be a good skiing year?
I don't know because the La Nina, El Nino cycles. I don't know. Last year was supposed to be kind of average, and we had one of the biggest winters we've ever had. And then this summer was supposed to be hot and dry, and we've had more moisture this summer than we've ever had. So I don't know.
Kind of make sure if those forecasters even have a clue.
Yeah.
But
it is kind of a unique area where we live because there's, it's just a big ridge that, and so the atmospheric conditions on the leeward side are a little different. It gets quite a bit more moisture on that side, but, yeah, you never know. I mean, where Bridger Bowl is a ski hill, and I know we got to go, but it's called the Bridger Bowl cloud, and there'll be a cloud that hangs over it in the wintertime, and town will get maybe half an inch of snow, and Bridger Bowl could get up to 50 or 60 inches of snow on the same night.
5 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the house is buried, like it's a tunnel to the door.
Okay. Okay. If I make it up there before the snow melts this fall, will you promise you won't kidnap me and throw me in a helicopter?
Oh yeah. Except, well, yeah, that's it. I'll make that promise because
I might go skiing with you, just maybe not out of a helicopter.
we'll just tour around on the Ranger.
That might be about my speed. It's been a few years since I've been on skis. All right. What do you want to close it out with?
I don't know. I really like your podcast and everybody that's on it. And I've just found so much inspiration I met Logan this summer and like people like him and Hobbs, and it's definitely, in yourself, have opened my eyes to a kind of a whole new era of, management and grazing management, stuff like that. So I would say to, everybody out there, keep listening. And
yeah, definitely do that. Keep listening and make sure to like, share, and follow for more content.
Stay inquisitive.
Stay inquisitive. I like it.
Cool.
I think that'll do it. Appreciate you, Walker.
You bet. I appreciate you. Have a good one.
Yep. Guys, have a great week. See ya. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review if you haven't already. And don't forget to check out the Q&A and the polls on Spotify. Your support helps us bring more enlightening conversations and fresh stories from the world of farming and ranching. Thank you for listening to Ranching Reboot, your favorite regenerative ag podcast.